Hi everyone. We're going to get this fabulous evening started. Welcome. I'm Brenda McKinley, the Library Director. And if we could give a round of applause to Mr. Nick Donofrio and David Don. So I am going to, this is a night I can tell you that I adjust that a little bit. Sorry about that. It's an evening that I have been waiting for a very long time. I'm sure many of us in the audience. So I am not going to delay. I'm going to turn over to our moderator, and I just want to say a few words about him. David Yawn, along with his wife Julie, are very long-time supporters of the library, and I might add a customer of Books on the Common. David is a 2-term library board member, serving in leadership positions and spearheading numerous inquiry and board efforts. David is also a long-time corporate communications expert, sharing his many talents at Sony, Banks of America, and for more than 2 decades at IBM. So we are in very good hands this evening, and I will turn it over to David.
We'll see if I can I'm getting a little bit of room.
It might be the gain or something.
Yeah. Or can we turn off that mic?
That one doesn't go up.
How's that? Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, now I can hear some amplification there. Okay, thank you, Brenda, and good evening, everybody. It's really a thrill to be here and to host this special evening, and thank you for joining us. Before we start, before Nick comes up, I want to share an important point. While we're here tonight because we want to hear Nick's story, this is also a fundraising event for the Ridgefield Library, and that's important because this incredible venue that you're in, whether you're in it for the first time or you've been here many, many times, relies heavily on donations to not only produce events such as this, but just to have its daily, day-to-day operations. Only about 70% of the library's budget comes from the town, which means the library has to raise the other 30% through donations from people like you and me, and the Donofrios. And as much as Nick and Anita are generous, they can't do it on their own, so we count on people like you to help. If you enjoy tonight's event, and I know you will, we ask that you consider also making a donation to the library. You can give a check to Brenda. You can go online and easily do it. And there's a donation box back where Nick will be signing books after the event tonight. And by the way, Nick literally is putting his money where his mouth will be tonight. In addition to the incredible donations he makes on an annual basis to the library, he's going to donate a matching amount for every book sold tonight. So that should encourage you, if you bought one, go buy 2 more. If tonight's about lessons, one of the lessons is be as generous as Nick. I do want to spotlight one of our library's greatest partners and a true asset to the Ridgefield community, and I'm talking about our great local independent bookstore. Nearly 4 decades now, and the past 18 years under the ownership of Darwin Ellis and Ellen Burns, who's here with us tonight. Nick and Anita are great supporters of not only the library, but also Books on the Common, and I know from talking with Ellen, she's thrilled that they were able to play such a big role in helping to promote and sell Nick's new book. The library is very grateful for this partnership and for how Ellen and Darwin make so many of these special events possible. So please buy local, not only for Nick's book, but all of your reading needs. I've been struggling over the last week trying to figure out how to introduce someone who truly doesn't need an introduction. He did send me his bio. It's like an 8-point type. I mean, it is so dense. I'm sure the scientists here could find an element that it is as dense as. But some of the highlights. Nick began his IBM career in 1964, where he stayed for 44 years before graduating in 2008 as IBM's first and only Executive Vice President of Innovation and Technology. He is also an honorary IBM Fellow. I counted on this document I had to take out my magnifying glass. He currently serves or has served on the board of directors of, at last count, 20 different universities, corporations, and nonprofit organizations. He's a fellow in countless organizations, including Society of Women Engineers and something in Scotland, and that's pretty good for an Italian guy from Beacon, New York. He holds 9 honorary degrees from some of the largest and most respected universities in the world. And he and his wife, Anita, have been honored locally for their generous philanthropy and commitment to the community, including twice by the library, by the Ridgefield Playhouse, and just last month, Nick and Anita were honored by ACT, our stellar performing arts center here in town. That's just the tip of the iceberg, but it should give you a sense of Nick's impact on not only this community, but the world. And now we'll get to hear about his journey firsthand. Ladies and gentlemen, Nick Donofrio. Go for the handheld.
I'm going with something that I know works. I expect to fix all this stuff if it breaks. So it's a pleasure to be with you. It's either me or you that's got to go off. Yeah. Feedback. Have you turned off? Yeah, you're off. Can you hear me? Yes, you can. So good evening. Thank you all very much for coming. It's so good to see so many of you. David, that was a great introduction, just pretty much the way I wrote it. What he didn't tell you is we worked together for many, many years at IBM. He polished me up and shined me up and stuck me in front of more audiences than he could shake a stick at. And we did pretty well in the end. So you want to just turn the volume up on this thing?
Yeah.
People are having trouble hearing. That sounds better.
And I'll try to project as much.
Yeah, you project this, but not too much, because my wife's worried about you getting COVID, so you stay over there. I don't want to hear about that stage stuff. I gotta go home and live with her, so.
She did send me several notes today.
I'm
saying
sure she did.
It's possible for him
No,
not
you
to
should
get
have seen the note she sent me. There's only actually 1 or 2 things that are wrong with that introduction, and I'm not going to really pick on them and leave them pretty much the way they are.
See, I thought he was going to say that he likes to, something that works. And then
No, it's actually 10 degrees, 10 honorary degrees that I have. I actually have, and this was a real privilege, I have an honorary associate's degree from Norwalk Community College. So everybody wants to talk about their honorary PhDs, of which I have a number, but I feel so absolutely, that deserves a round of applause. I feel so that pretty much completes me, by the way. So I got one of everything, several of others. And it's just been a lot of fun. We lived here in Ridgefield by choice. You know that. We moved in 1987, Anita and I. This was her choice. I had a different place in mind. This is what she wanted. And my wife, if you know anything about my wife, she gets what she wants and doesn't stop until she gets it. We are privileged to be here. We will be with you till the day we die. So we don't plan on going anywhere. She owns a number of places in town, but we own nothing outside of Ridgefield, and we probably never will. This is where she wants to be, and this is where we will be. So I figure I better help you continue to make it the very best community that we can make it, because this is our community, and we think the world of it, and we think the world of you, and I thank you very sincerely for coming out this evening. Okay.
Well, now I can trust you. And I changed my socks before I came here to something much more.
Nick?
No.
No, not even close.
If I'd known,
Not even close, David. I don't know what's wrong with you. Yeah, I thought I thought you better than that.
I had like the Rolling Stones.
That's good. That would have worked. Yeah.
So anyway, we're going to talk a little bit. Nick and I are going to talk a little bit, and you're going to be forced to listen. But we will take questions. But having worked with Nick on this book, I have some insight into some of the things that I think are some of the more salient lessons in the book, some of the more interesting anecdotes. And I'll try to throw in a few curveballs, but I think he actually knows the material fairly well. And actually, the thing that I wanted to start with is the start of the book. Just about every biography or autobiography or memoir we read starts in childhood. And it often feels obligatory, not really revelatory. I actually heard on NPR two hosts talking just a day or two ago, and someone made that same exact comment. They always skip through the childhood part of the book. I advise you not to, because your first chapter directly informs every subsequent page in the book. And the phrase, "if nothing changes, nothing changes," comes directly from your father. And I was wondering if you could share with us insights about life with your father, his influence on you, your life, and your career.
Well, we don't have enough time for all of that, to be honest with you. He was a powerful man. My father is the son of 4 Italian immigrants. My father never finished high school. He left in the 10th grade. His mother, my grandmother, who I never knew, passed away after a year or two of giving birth to her last son. So she had 4 boys. And he had to go home and help his father. And in typical old world fashion, my grandfather, who I did know very well, dialed home to Italy and said, "I need help." He didn't speak English. He actually never spoke English. He said like 3 words. I mean, I had to learn Italian in order to communicate with him. He literally got a mail order bride. I mean, he called his family in Aparia, which is just outside of Naples. My grandfather was a shoemaker. Couldn't get a job as a shoemaker here, became a hat maker. And he literally got a woman who was a friend of his wife's, who was willing to come over sight unseen and become his wife. And she became the only grandmother I ever knew. So it's an old world story. It's an old world background. So both of them spoke very little English. 4 boys, tough environment. You must figure that out in your head. My father was a tough guy, a man who ruled with his hand. He also meted out punishment with his hand. And, dinner time was a very interesting experience in my family. I'll explain that in just a moment. So, uneducated, hardworking, bound and determined, knew what he knew. And he pushed hard, pushed himself hard, but he pushed everybody around him hard. Was in World War II as a member of the Army Air Force. There was no Air Force, so he was a mechanic. Learned well to do things with his hands. Came home from the war and went to work at Mattawan State Hospital for the criminally insane. It's called something else now, but it was literally that. It was a criminal institution for the criminally insane. The Mad Bomber was the celebrity that passed through the streets of Beacon to go to Mattawan. If you remember the Mad Bomber, some of you must remember him. So he's a tough guy. Worked 8 hours nonstop, no guns, no batons, no nothing, just their hands and their strength to manage, groups of 20 somewhat disturbed people who they were making even more disturbed, but that's a different story. And he would come home and go to work again because he couldn't rule on that, so he would come home paint houses. He was a janitor. He typically had 3 jobs. So he was a no-nonsense guy. He had no time for hugging, cuddling, snuggling. That just wasn't in the deal. And I'm in the middle. I have an older brother, 2 younger sisters. Had an older brother and 2 younger sisters. Unfortunately, a brother passed away and one of my sisters passed away. So my father would mete out punishment at dinner time. It was like, okay, what did Nikki do today? So, and my youngest sister, she couldn't wait. She had a list, Let me tell you what he did. And here, while she's rattling off all the things I did, I'm gobbling the food now. Because I figured out, if I didn't get it in before that came out, I wasn't going to eat anything. Because I'm ducking and weaving and trying to get under the table. So, it's that kind of a story until we move along a pace here, and he starts to realize I'm a little different than he thought, and I start to realize he's a little different than I thought. He's actually a very innovative guy. He's very clever. The book explains all of that to you. There's this famous story about the salt shaker. He gets things for nothing. He gets junk, and he makes it work. We had only push lawnmowers. We had a very big yard. He finds this old, broken down gasoline lawnmower. He can fix the engine, but the gas tank isn't attached to the engine, and they're on two different planes, and he's struggling to figure out how to connect the gas tank to the... He figures out how to do it with a copper spiral, and he makes that copper spiral by taking this big salt shaker out of the kitchen, and he wraps the copper pipe around the salt shaker 3 times in order to tolerate the vibration that's going to come when he puts them all together. I'll never forget that. It's inspirational to me. That may have been the thing that kind of linked me to, oh my gosh, maybe I can do that. If he can do that, I can do that. And from there, it just became one big push and shove between he and I. You're not doing enough. Do better. What do you mean do better? I got an A. There's no A pluses? I got 100. You mean there's nothing better than 100? How many Regents finals can I bring home with 100? New York State had Regences. That's all he wanted. Well, I'll enroll you in this class. And he put me in a summer class. What'd you do that for? I mean, by the time I get to be a senior in high school, there's not going to be anything for them to teach me. Don't worry about it. They'll come up with something. They'll think of something for you. And then, we started to work together. He made my brother and I work with him. It makes sense. We're painting houses. We're cleaning out places. We're working with him, right? So he's doing it. We're doing it. Plus, we're keeping up the house ourselves. My brother and I have to cut the grass. He's a gardener, but Italian would not have a garden. I mean, we canned everything, so he planted, we weeded. We weeded, we harvested, and we watered, and if we did it wrong, he would let us know. And all that pushing and shoving, all that changing, comes to a head in the book. When I, boldly, between my sophomore and junior year, decided to have it out with him on our front porch. That's why the porch is important in the book, and that's where this story, if nothing changes, is told to me for the first time. So he's not, you get the point, he's not a warm, fuzzy kind of guy. He's not a cuddly guy. He's not giving you advice all the time. He's pushing you, he's shoving you. You're trying to interpret this, trying to figure out what he's doing, except for that night. When I push back on him, he'd say, what are you doing all this to me for? I'm a good boy. I do everything you want me to do. I have a paper route. I'm trying to figure out how to win scholarships to go to college, because I know we're not going to be able to pay for it. I have no time other than your time. Why, Dad? Why? And I figured he's either going to beat the living tar out of me, or I'm going to get something. And I got something I really wasn't expecting. When he just stopped, he looked at me and he said, because, son, if you really aren't happy with what you've been getting, why do you keep doing what you've been doing? Because that's all you're going to get. Change something. If nothing changes, nothing changes. End of story. It became my guiding principle. It's how I shape my life. I look back at it, and that's what you do when you write these stories, David. You look back, and you try to say, how did I get here? Of all the paths I could have picked, why did I pick this one? My mother's terribly influential, and she's in the story as well. She's the reason I went to IBM. What good Italian son wouldn't do what his mother tells him to do? But this idea of change, of being passionate about it, driving for it, embracing it, I have to say not then and there, later on, it became my mantra. It became exactly what I was. And then I thought, the more I did it, and the stories in the book tell you this, the more it kind of all made sense. I look at all the jobs that IBM gave me, all the crazy things they asked me to do, all the broken messes. Maybe they weren't messes, but yeah, they were broken. So they were really broken issues that they asked me to fix and go solve. And many of you, I see you here. Many of you in this room helped me do a lot of these things. And I just enabled you to do them. I learned early on not to be like my father. That's another story in the book. Because I was my father. I mean, you have to realize that. I mean, you really, not only is the DNA and bone structure there, but his personality is really imprinted on me. You know, and I have to work not to be my father. And if Anita were here, she would absolutely second that.
Say you're failing?
Oh yeah, she tells me exactly when I'm failing. Oh, you're like your father again, are you? I mean, so all of that, David, is what goes into the Melu to kind of bring the first part of that book together. We wrote that, as you know, 6 years ago. And then we were struggling with what to do with it. You know, leave it as a story by itself, to your point, or we add on to it, and if you add on to it. So I finally came to the vision that said, you know what? I think one book is all we got in us. We're putting that book together with, we're going to get a lot of other people to tell their story. So you have the privilege in the book of 37 other people telling their stories right alongside my story. So it's not just me trying to influence you to say, you know, this is right. It's my opinion and then it's their opinion. And, you know, some pretty reasonably powerful people like Sam Palmisano, Lisa Sue, Tom Rennie from the Bank of New York. I mean, some very interesting, Jack Kroll from, once from DuPont and my partner when we were at Delphi Active. So lots of interesting voices to kind of help you make up your mind about, is this real? Do I believe it? Or is this something else? That by itself, as you can only imagine, takes a huge amount of effort. 37 other people. You had to tape them, we had to get to talk to them. And then I have to say, sadly to you, 4 of them died while we were finishing the book, which made me very angry. And as you know, David, I pushed my co-partner here is Mike DeMarco. I said, Mike, enough is enough. We're publishing. I don't care what form it's in. I'm not losing another person. I don't like this. It doesn't feel good. Let's put our head. So we pushed and pushed, and we got the book out this year. But, you know, we not only our apologies to the people, but we had to find surrogates to sign off on those 4 people. Because everything in this book is signed off. So everybody who was quoted in this book, says something in this book, has literally signed off on it. And, yes, before my IBM colleagues asked me, IBM also signed off on this book. I didn't have to give it to them, but I decided I wasn't going to fool around. It's not a blue book. There's no blue language in it. It's not a kiss and tell book. I'm not telling stories. I'm not trying to rewrite history. I'm simply telling you my story through my eyes. And I have to punctuate that because I have to tell each of you that if you haven't written your own story, you should. Because someone else will write it about you later. And it's always better to write your own story. So I believe in this concept of self-documentation, and that's...
Well, that's actually one of the ironies of the book. Is so much of it is about Nick's father, but he gave away one of the plot twists, which was his mother's, the reason he worked at IBM. But also, you know, I guess one of the genesis of this was as a gift to your mother.
Yes.
You had a book written about her life. Before she died, she was in her late 90s.
98.
98,
That's
so
right, 98, yeah.
was able to capture the story. And actually, that inspired me. I did something very similar with my mother, too, so it's great to capture those family histories. I want to jump ahead a little bit to a moment of great change at IBM, and it just coincided with great change for you. And that's joining the company in 1964.
Yeah.
And for those of you who are IBMers and those of you who aren't, 1964 is a seminal year in IBM's 111-year history, is it now? Because that was when there was the introduction of something called the System 360. And this, at the time, was a $5 billion bet made by the CEO of IBM in the future of the company to completely transform the computing platforms that the company was selling and so forth. I guess my first question, as a student at RPI, getting called in the summer of '64 to work on this, did you have any idea how transformative the the System 360 would be, and perhaps if you could put some in context for us what resulted in, and also what a big risk Thomas Watson took with it.
So I had no clue what I was doing in 1964. I want you to know that. I wish I could take full cognitive credit for it. Look, I'm at RPI. I'm worried about how we're going to afford it. I know my mother and father's situation. I won the Gannett News Boy Scholarship, which is how I got to RPI. I won a Regents Scholarship. But when I got to RPI, I realized there's more money that you need, and we don't have it. So RPI had this famous co-op program. Only 100 students out of every class could be co-ops. So it was very competitive. And the first cut point was your grades. So, and the book tells you some stories about my grades. So you had to blow it out your first semester because you were going to interview in your second semester freshman year. Because you were going to go to school the summer of your sophomore year. So you're going off cycle. So you would learn something about your engineering discipline. In my case, I chose to be an electrical engineer. And then in that September, you were going to work. So that's the way that the rhythm and flow went. And I did pretty well, after being a jerk. I did pretty well in my freshman year. I got a D sent home. They don't send grades home anymore, do they? But at RPI, they sent them home at the 6-week mark. Any Ds or Fs, your parents got a note from RPI saying, your son got a D in chemistry. So, of course, my father just spiraled straight through the roof. Like, what are you doing? You're partying. I was 18 years old. I could drink, away for the first. He was right. I did not tell him I was partying, but I said, no, it's just hard. And, well, you better get your butt in gear, and if you don't, we'll just pull you out of there. We'll send you to Dutchess Community College. We don't have to do this. He goes on and on and on. So, I figured I was going to get that lecture, and I figured it was going to get worse. So I went back to RPI, and I ate the chemistry final in order to get a B, and my average went straight up, because it's a heavy course. It's a 4-credit course, so I had a 3.6 my first semester of my freshman year. That qualified me for the co-op program, and then I just competed, based on interviews. I interviewed 4 companies. I got 2 job offers, one from IBM, and believe it or not, one from American Electric and Power. And I thought seriously about being a power engineer. I don't know where this came from. I actually thought we'd have to rebuild this thing at one time, David. So I thought, but nobody wants to do that anymore. So I finally talked myself out of it. Actually, my mother talked me into the IBM job. She's the one who put her foot down and said, no, American Electric Power's in New York City. You'll have to find a spot. It'll cost you money. You come home. You stay home. You save all your money. Let IBM pay you. And then, you travel to Poughkeepsie, which is where I was going, and save all your money, and then you have more money to spend when you get back to RPS. So that's what happened. That's exactly what happened. Did I know what I was doing? Ladies and gentlemen, I was actually designing the ferrite core memory systems that went into the mainframe. I didn't even know what I was doing. I knew ferrite cores. I understood magnetism. I figured that all out. This very advanced group that I was in, they're giving me all these ideas, and they said, do whatever you want. So I wrote this famous IBM at these now TR, Technical Research Report, a technical research report. I wished I could find that damn thing. I guess IBM stopped. They stopped. And I was telling them how to build one ferrite core memory after another. These cores would get smaller and smaller. They fit inside each other. There's a way to do it. And I was like, here I am, this little nut from RPI, barely savvy in electrical engineering terms after one semester in the EE department, and they're letting me do this. So I go back, and as you go back, they give you bigger roles, and my roles were more system roles, after that. The logic and it's all around the System 360, because they had announced it, and by the way, they're saying we're having trouble with it, so I volunteered to go figure out, what do I know? They said, well, these are all wrong. We know these are all mistakes. So would you like to become a wire wrapper? I said, how hard can that be? What do I have to do to get this little wire wrap done? Anybody else besides me remember this? And they're, they cut all of the things that were wrong, and I had to wire up the things that were right. Like alpha, beta, gamma across the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so that's the way the matrix runs, and they tell you what to wire to wire. I didn't even know what I was doing. And here I am working on a first system 360. I mean, it's like, me. You gotta be kidding me. You trusted me to do that? Because it was like stupid work. It's like, we don't want you to know what you're doing. Just do what we're telling you to do, and we'll get it out. So we got out finally, David, went back, then I started getting more systems jobs, and I started to say, I learned about the programming language, I learned about what was going on with 360, and I said, this is actually a cool device. Now this machine itself saves the IBM company, to be honest with you. A $5 billion investment for a $1 billion revenue source. But what it does, it makes a different promise to everyone. It promises you, as a client, to never have to change your data or applications again. So it's going to be compatible with itself. And most of those mainframes back then, in the 60s, 50s, 60s, weren't. Every time they came out with something new, it was different. Because the technology was so different. How do you be compatible with vacuum tubes? How do you be compatible with wire contact relays? You don't even know what these things are. They're foreign technologies. It's like, how can you be compatible with things that are so technologically different? That was their excuse. And then, of course, once they settled into the transistor world, they could be compatible, but they chose not to be. Even IBM. But Watson Jr. lays the law down, says we're going to be compatible with this from here forward. So that was 1964. We're in 2022. So what is that? 58 years ago, those systems are still compatible with themselves. So if you wrote code in 64, it'll still run on the brand new things that they're shipping right now out of Poughkeepsie, because they're still shipping these mainframes, these System 360 mainframes. It's just an incredible story as it plays out. And David can't wait to now push me to the next part of the story.
There's an important story here, though. And you skipped something that happened 28 years after you joined IBM and were doing that wire wrapping or whatever you're just talking about. I didn't understand it, but when I worked at IBM and so forth. But in 1992, shareholders in the world were calling for IBM to be broken up. And the thing that was called a dinosaur by the mainstream media, the front page of the New York Times, cover of Fortune magazine, was the IBM mainframe. New CEO comes in, everyone's quaking in their boots. He's getting advice, cut the mainframe, get rid of it. And for some reason, he turned to you, while you were in charge of the business, and asked what you should do. And if you can pick up the story from there.
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. The job I had just before that. So I'm moving everywhere. The family's getting tired of that. I'm beating them up. We're moving every other year. So we moved to Ridgefield in '87, and the law has been laid down by my wife and my daughter. She goes to Ridgefield High School. I'm not moving. I'm finished. I'm starting here. I'm finishing here. My wife says I'm finished. We're not moving anymore. So cut that crap out. Next job I get, as David knows, is in Austin, Texas, to fix the RS-6000. And this is IBM's new workstation. I go there for 3 years. We get that fixed. First prize, and I kind of say this in the book, and this is the fresh part of the book. First prize for having fixed that problem, and Steve's smiling behind that mask, is to go to Poughkeepsie, fix the man. I said, what? That's first prize? For launching this billion-dollar business, we cleaned up in that marketplace. The RS-6000, they call it their P-Series now. We buried competition like Sun, DEC, HP, Floating Point. These companies don't even exist anymore. You don't even know who they are. And we're the only ones standing. So we buried them with that. Good research technology. Just needed a good leader, to kind of bring it to Matt. And so I figured, wow, go to Poughkeepsie. I come home and I tell my wife, I said, they want me to go to Poughkeepsie now. And of course, to me, I'm going home. My parents still live there. My mom and dad are there. My sisters, my brother, my grandmother, my family, my aunts, my uncle, I have a huge extended family. Go fix the mainframe. Oh man, really? And I mean, I struggled with this. Should I stay? Should I go? Is this what you get? I went. I said to me, the good news is I don't have to move, right? We can stay here, and I'll go back and forth to Poughkeepsie. And the bad news is when I got there, it got worse and worse and worse. And it became like, okay, this ain't gonna work. What we've got to do here is what we did in Austin. We got to move to a different approach, and more importantly, David, we got to go back to my roots in Burlington, Vermont, which is where we built CMOS technology for IBM. We got to use that, and we're going to have to shutter big parts of Fishkill. We have to shutter Kingston. We're going to have to shutter. So honestly, worst part of my life. Cried almost every day. My mother would call me every day and yell at me, why are you laying off your uncle? Why are you laying off your cousin? And I would say to her, Ma, now's the time to not tell anybody that your son is the IBM executive. I just be quiet. And I can't help those people, Mom, because, I got 35,000 people I got to save. These 35,000 people have to leave, and we'll do everything we can to help them. And we did. Gut-wrenching. But, same mainframe. Just, we're going to flip it. What do you mean we're going to flip it? Well, we're going to move the technology, something different, change the programming model, but we're not going to change the way the clients interface with it. It's going to stay the same. Who believes this besides this idiot? That's kind of what was going on in Army. And when Gerstner showed up, that's what was top of his mind. I mean, he knew what the numbers said. I mean, this is an amazingly important, vital, and profitable system. We're not fooling around with it here. I mean, we're into the middle of the lifeblood of business, global business. So either I get it right or we get it wrong. And it's not just me, and it's not just the IBM company. We get it wrong for people who are lining up at the door. Like, you can't screw this up. We are so dependent upon this thing, Nick. Client after client after client. So I said, look, you don't know me, I don't know you. But let me tell you, this is what we got to do. I remember telling John Akers, God rest his soul, this. He was just mortified when I told him what we had to do. But remember, people always tell you truth to power. It's hard to do that. It's really hard to do it when it's tough truth. When it's like, we got it all wrong. Everything we have is not what we need. We have other stuff we have that we need, but the stuff you think you want and the stuff you think we're supposed to. So what did we write off? I think we wrote off a year later $5 billion, something like that.
$9 billion.
$9 billion. About half of it was me. Half of it was me with the mainframe. I mean, they piled, this is the way companies do this to everybody. The minute there's going to be a write-up, everybody says, I got one too. Let me throw him on the pile. I'm throwing him on the pile. So, but the bulk of that was me. To write these assets off, which we didn't need anymore. They're not going to serve us. We did it. We bit the bullet. Lots of you were there to bear witness to this. Lots of you were there to help me do this. Monumental software job. Monumental software job. Think about what I'm saying. We're going to change the whole way the system operates. We're not going to change the way the client sees it. We're going to hold the client harmless, so we lived up to Watson's commitment. Never change it because of us. And obviously, it paid off. What can I say? I mean, the thing is still there. Right? 58 years later, we did this when, David? 1992, 1993. So we actually knew what we were doing. In the end, we actually knew what we were doing. Not me, the bright, wonderful people who worked in that division. The women and the men, the software side of it and the hardware side of it. We hooked our wagon to Burlington, Vermont. That's where the technology was going to come from. They didn't let us down. They delivered for us. A lot of life threats. I mean, I had to live with guards for 6 months because people hated me. They hated my wife. They hated my family. The kids had to get protected. My only hope was that this was going to pass, and it eventually did pass. And then as we slowly dug our way out, it became more obvious to people that we were right. Everybody else that was competing with us left. Because they held on to the old thing. And they tried to warn them. We even told our competitors what we were doing. We even told them what the formula was. We told them we'd sell them the stuff if they wanted it. They just didn't believe us. You know? And when you're a leader, that's the price you pay. It's lonely. It's very, very lonely. I wouldn't have, I didn't want that job. I told you that. I wouldn't have traded it for anything. To be honest with you, in hindsight.
Those decisions paid off, though, because to this day, many, not all, not the same amount, but still the majority of banking transactions and
For sure.
financial movement of money around the world is done on an IBM mainframe. And if you hadn't had the courage to convince Lou that we got to keep on doing this, we got to make some serious
Well, I was
changes.
leaving if he said no. I wasn't saying, I had made my mind up.
That is not in the book.
That's not in the book,
Exclusive.
but I was not going to stay. I told Anita, you know, I can't have done this. I can't have, we had actually run the string a little bit. You know, Lou gets a lot of credit for it, but John actually did let me, John Akers did let me do some things. We did start to, you know, pull the string. We did start to lay down what we were doing. So it was in motion by the time Lou got there, but clearly the people in Armand, God love you all. Some of you may be here from the finance side. They hated me. They thought I was just doing absolutely the wrong thing. They would come, this is in the book too, they would come with presentation after presentation to convince me I didn't know what I was doing. That there was no elasticity for the demand for the mainframe. Elasticity means if you lower the price, the quantity will go up. So if E times Q equals R, R will rise. And I just come from Austin where I knew it was true. Steve is a big leader of the PC business. He knew it was true. We were getting eaten alive by everything else that had better price performance curves than we did. It was so obvious to me. But the people at Armand were like, you don't know what you're talking about. You know, they showed me GDP curves. I said, where did you get this garbage? Who's making this stuff up? It doesn't make any sense to me. So I just said, I'm not listening to you. You gave me this business to run. You can fire me, take me out of it. You told me to fix it. That's what I'm going to do. And I just put my head down. And here's a case where ignorance works. Where I don't want to be smarter than I am on that topic. I want to do exactly what intuitively I think is right. So don't try to educate me with all those sophisticated, analyses that you did. They make no sense in the real world. And you have to always remember that, when you're a leader, you remember me saying this. There's people who can tell you what to do, who have never done a thing in their life. I don't listen to those people, to be honest with you. If you haven't done it, I'm not interested in hearing you tell me stories. So, maybe that's why I wrote the book, because we did it. If I had failed, you wouldn't have probably heard from me.
So I want to quickly, because I do want to make sure we have time for questions from the audience, but I want to ask you a few questions just for some quick reflections on management style. And there are dedicated chapters to some of these topics, but let's talk about diversity. I think many corporations still view the concept of diversity sometimes as a marketing ploy. We see it every month with whatever month it is. It shows up in all advertising. Or worse, it's a box to check off. Recent stories we've been seeing with Wells Fargo and the interviews they were doing after people already were signed for jobs. Yet from the very start of your career, you saw it as central to not only your success, but the success of your teams and IBM as a whole. But you're also very pragmatic about it. It's sort of both a moral obligation, but a business obligation to commit to diversity. Can you speak briefly about that?
Yeah, I think that's the important thing for everybody to make personal. I am a moral person. I like to believe that. I have my own religion. I don't want to superimpose mine on yours. And I found out that if I could talk more business sense to you about why something mattered, we could move faster together, independent of what you believe versus what I believe. And that's not just my philosophy, David, as you know. Watson himself had a lot of this philosophy. Mr. Watson Sr., a man way before his time. Women didn't work. I mean, if you remember that we're back in 1920, women weren't in business. There's this famous story, and, you know, no one's shot me down yet with this story, and IBM even used it at the 100th anniversary, where he would go to every sales class. Every sales class was held in Endicott, New York. There's a building, there's actually an education building, that's where we train the salespeople. He would go to every one of the graduations he'd go to. One day he goes to one of these graduations, the story goes, and he says to the class manager, hey, when I come back here in 4 weeks, I want a class of women, all women. I want to graduate all women salespeople. The guy doesn't know what to do. He's like, is the old man, did he bump his head? Is he crazy? He doesn't do it. The guy doesn't do it. This is a story now. He doesn't do it. Mr. Watson comes back in 4 weeks. There's a class of men. He says to the guy, fire them all. I told you I want a class of women. I'll be back next week. You better have a class of women, and then I'll come back when they graduate. Now, there is a picture in the 100th anniversary folder of an all-women sales class at Endicott, New York. So there may be some shred of truth to the story. I mean, you can't validate it. Everyone's dead. Or whatever. So I like that. I like that story. I like that story. And I said, here's the man's kind of saying, look, I can see it. It's changing. I don't care what everybody else is doing. You know, we're going to be an equal opportunity employer. We're going to, and we did the same thing with people of color, you know, long before the color lines were broken. So, you know, I felt a bit emboldened, I guess is the right word, like, okay, I'm going with the old man. So anybody wants to question my motivation, go check with the old man, you know, because this is what he did, this is what I'm going to do. So it started to make more sense to me. I hooked up with all the right people. Ted Childs is an amazing leader in the arena of people, diverse people, and the whole issue of diversity, inclusion, and equity. Ted laid the foundation for a lot of this stuff. I mean, not only at IBM, he does it now outside of IBM. He's also graduated from IBM. So we were partners. Ted and I partnered up. We kicked butt. We did a lot of things. We pushed, you know, not only the agenda for Hispanics and for Native Americans and for African Americans and for women, but the same thing is true for gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, questioning people. There is a story in the book about gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people. We bought Lotus. We bought it early in Lou Gerstner's tenure. Lotus had same-sex partner benefits. What are we going to do with that in IBM? Do we erase it, rub it out, or do we embrace it and give it to everyone else? The story is pretty accurate in the book. Goes around the table, everybody's talking, and it doesn't look good for what I wanted to do. Come to the end, and I said, look, if you're that smart, that you know who you need and who you don't need, a priori, by just looking at people, you know, and saying yes, no, you know, if you're that smart, then you can do that. And you know you don't need people who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, then by all means, snuff this program out. But if you're honest with yourself and say you don't know, and you need them all, then we should be embracing this program. We should be welcoming everyone into this company to be their best. And Lou, a lot of the things that you want to do are going to be done by gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people. And there's no way for you to know that ahead of time. But it's your call. He got totally pissed off. Stopped the meeting. Stormed out. Well, remember, he's a staunch Catholic. He went to Chaminade. The rumor is he still goes to church every day. Next day, we had to go to an annual meeting. That's what we were kind of winding this up for. And he announces that we are going to embrace same-sex partner benefits across the United
And this was 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Very different conversation back then. It was front page news.
It was front page news, and but I mean, you got to go to what makes sense. I'm emotional about it. He's emotional about it. Everybody else was pouring out their emotions about it. But I'm just trying to say, look logically. Can we think logically here for a minute? Do you know what you're doing? And you're biting your nose to spite your face. I mean, is that what you're going to do, or are you going to do what's right for the company? And to his credit, and I'm sure it was hard for him, I'm sure it was incredibly hard for him, he did what was right for the company, and I'd like to think I had him. Now, Ted Childs tells the story a little bit more colorfully than I do, but
I invited Ted to come tonight.
yeah, I cleaned it up in the book. But I think that's the way you should be thinking about this issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you know what? We don't know what's on the horizon. We don't know what's further out there. We think, well, we're diverse enough, we're inclusive enough. Like, what does that mean? Diverse enough, inclusive. You have no idea what you're saying. I mean, when you say you're going to be diverse, inclusive, and equitable, it's a wide open thing you're saying. You have to welcome everyone. The ones you like, the ones you don't like. The people who think the way you think, the people who don't think the way you think. It's purposeful. These decisions are purposeful. The common good is the common good. The common good is this objective. We want to be able to do this. Well, then we need everybody here to be able to do this. So, yeah, I feel good about that legacy that I left at IBM. So whether they're screwing it up or not, that's for someone else to say. But I think we did a pretty good job. That's why when David said, I am a member of the Society of Women Engineers.
He was the chair of the National Academy of Color.
Well, the National Action Council for Minorities in Engineering. I was on that board for 20 years. I was their chair for 5 years. I was a member of SHIP. That's Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. So, you got to reach out and engage. You can't just do this. Can't say one thing and then be something else and not do what you're espousing to do. So I continue to learn. In the book I say, this has been emotional, I apologize. My mom and dad, I think they raised a good son. I think my wife raised a good husband. So I'm realistic about who I am. I started out in a different place, and I got here by working hard to get here, knowing full well that I am imperfect in every step along the way. And each one of those people who we dedicated the book to had a great impact on my life, and continue to. I continue to tell my kids, keep teaching your father, because he's not done.
So I'll do one more question, and then we'll hand over the opportunity to the audience. I mean, a related topic to this is mentoring. And I know firsthand that, you mentored hundreds, if not thousands of people, including many who are in this room. And you made a very concerted effort to make sure, you had a diverse group of proteges. And there's even an anecdote that I share in the book where one day I went to Dick and counseled him that you need to cut back, you're doing too much mentoring, and you can read it in the book, but I was told in no uncertain terms that he was going to continue to do that. Can you talk about why the concept of mentoring is so important to you, and perhaps what do you learn from your proteges?
Yeah, I think that's very important. The fact that each of these mentoring engagements teaches me something as much as me trying to teach them something. I learned a long time ago, even the underserved shall lead. I mean, we're naive to think that we have all the ideas ourselves as individuals, even or as a society. We learned a tremendous amount from India when we re-entered India. We learned a tremendous amount from as David knows, from Africa when we encouraged IBM to explore, sub-Saharan Africa. So you have to be open-minded about this and always be willing to learn. So when I engage with all of these folks, I mean, they're teaching me as much as I'm teaching them. I think it's critically important that where there are voids, we fill them. And, when you're trying to put more women into STEM disciplines or encourage them to join this, and they have very few role models, I mean, who's going to help them do that? Or African Americans, or Native Americans, or Hispanic, who's going to help them do that? There's so few people around to help them make that bridge or to get through it. And I figure it could be me. Maybe I'm the one who makes a difference. I've done talks here. I've had young women come back to me, and say, because of what you said, I'm going to Lehigh, and I'm going to become a mechanical engineer. Or I'm going to Penn State, and I'm going to become a chemical engineer. So I think you have got to engage. You can't just sit there on the sidelines, David, and say, it should change, it's not my fault, they didn't make it this way, let somebody else fix it. So my wife yells at me too, I've got 1,000 mentees. What do I care? I mean, I don't care if I have 2,000 mentees. You want my help, you ask for my help, I'll give you my help. It's that simple. I mean, nobody refused me. I had some early mentors. Jake Schmitzer, my father's friend. Why he was my father's friend, I'll never know. Jake Schmitzer went to RPI, he was an electrical engineer, he worked for the New York Central. He's one of the guys who electrified, the rail. Whatever the name you call that thing that runs up and down Beacon right now. I mean, he did that. And he's the one who had powerful influence on me. Number one, become an electrical engineer, and number two, to go to RPI. And I don't know that he spent a lot of time thinking about it. I was like, yeah, we're gonna have a few beers with Nick, sit on the porch, and talk to his son, And so why not do the same thing? Why don't each of us try to do the same thing? There's so many people who could benefit from what you know, from the differences you made, from the lessons that you learned. That's how we make progress faster. That's how we actually affect change. That's how we actually get to do something that makes a difference. And we have to do more in this country. Yesterday, I was on this talk for New York State, this whole climate issue in New York State. They're going to work on, they've committed themselves, 30, 35, 40, 50. They have all these commitments in New York State now. They're trying to figure out how to do them. So they had a big conference yesterday. And now it's obvious we need more power engineers. So now maybe I made the wrong decision. Maybe I should have gone to American Electric and Power. I told that story yesterday. They were like, oh my God, really? We do need power engineers. We have to start to educate them again. We got to redistribute the grid. All of that stuff has to be done over again. Should we be generating in smaller segments? Should we have community? All that stuff is wide open. I mean, it's okay, let's go. We need all this electricity. I knew that, by the way. I'm sorry the rest of you didn't figure that out. But I figured that out. So now, how do we get it to you? Where do we get it from? So who's going to do that, Dave? Who's going to encourage people? Who's going to encourage colleges to start those courses again? Those are not trivial courses. Long haul. How do you get electricity long haul? I mean, I don't even know if anybody knows what it is. That's another problem I have, by the way. We keep forgetting the details in this country. We don't actually understand how and why things work. This crowd over here knows this better than me. They come from research. So we forget the basics of what we're doing. We just keep plopping things on top of things and top of things. And it's like, does anybody other than me know what the basic equations for electricity are? I mean, could you write them down? I mean, actually know why electrons move. Do you? I say this to people. I say this to people who are Nobel laureates. I'm like, I'm going to get this guy out of here. What does he know? I don't know what they know. But I do know the basics of everything, and I think we've got to drive ourselves harder to be able to do that.
Okay. I have about a dozen more questions.
I'm sorry.
We're going to turn to the audience now, because
sorry.
we also, there's some people here who want to get the book signed.
I'm fine with anything they want to do. I'm not going anywhere tonight.
So,
Questions?
Brenda, are we going to try to do the microphones here?
Brenda's
First,
right
we're gonna-
behind you with the
Gentleman here in the white shirt.
I got a big voice.
She's
You do have a booming voice.
Just a real quick, off-the-wall question, and then a serious question. Who's that GQ model that's on page 16 or so?
Who was on page 16? Must be me.
It
It's
wasn't
me.
you.
It's
It's
me. Can you believe
Oh,
that?
so
Can you
this-
believe that?
So this is fantastic. When you
I'm
read-
such a big fan that I got the book on Kindle, I've read it already, so you should all buy it. Okay. Secondly, the
So can I
serious
just break? So what he's referring to, and this is a remarkable part of Nick's story, in 1967, for some reason, the corporate bigwigs on Madison Avenue said, we need a young engineer to typify the new breed of young people that are coming to work at IBM. And Nick was who they picked. In 1967.
There is a backstory there about white
We gotta let you
My
know.
white face got pictures.
Oh, really?
You know why?
Why?
They made me hide my wedding ring.
Oh, my God.
They made me take my engineering ring off of this finger and put it over my wedding ring. She picked that out in 2 seconds later.
I know I need this. But no, the serious question, one of the compelling things I thought about the book when I read it was the connection between IBM values and what your father talked to you about. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that's a very good point, and maybe that's why I stayed at IBM for 44 years, because they weren't so foreign. Those values were pretty well aligned. That value of hard work, it pays off, it matters. You know, stay on top of your game, don't stop trying. Excellence is important. You know, that just because it's done doesn't mean it's good enough. You know, he would push for he didn't even know what he was pushing it for, but he would push it to be better. He didn't even know what better meant, to be honest with you. It didn't matter. It just didn't matter. But that's what I saw in IBM. So your point is, that's an excellent point that you're making. I hadn't really reflected on that, but they were aligned. I could have left many times, to be honest with you. Jobs wanted me to go run Apple, you know. Never forgave me for not going. We ended our relationship not so well, and then he died, and I felt badly about that. So this isn't in the book. I actually wrote him a letter after he died and sent it to him, just to kind of square it up. So a little corny, but he was a good man in many ways. He very misunderstood, and I wish it had a different between. I wish it worked out differently for him, for sure. And I don't wish I left. I couldn't. I mean, Anita was very ill, and I just couldn't leave her. Timing was off, and who knows what would have happened if it were different.
But the reality is, the person that many of us would consider the icon or symbol of innovation was calling this guy at 11 o'clock at night, asking for tips and advice.
Yeah.
So it just shows you the type of influence.
Anita would say it's him again.
So I think I see a question over there. We'll get the microphone to you.
This goes along with your sense of values, right?
Yes.
This goes along with your statement about values of IBM.
Right.
And I always respected IBM for that, because I know what you're saying. How do you reconcile that with when Gerstner came in and he started venturing out?
Yeah,
And I think once Gerstner came in, it's just my personal opinion,
yeah,
those sense of values,
Yeah.
prior to that, if you had a job with IBM,
Yeah.
you were there for life.
Yeah.
And then that all changed.
yeah. So I hear what you're saying. I don't think we can blame that on Gerstner. I mean, you know, he had a different task. You know, his task was to save what was there, stop the bleeding, to turn things around. You have to remember, he said we didn't need a strategy, and we also didn't need values. So he gave us principles. We had, 18 principles or something like that, that he literally gave us a book, you know, with those principles in it, you know, guidelines or something like that. That was his style. just a different style. You know, we used to go back and forth, you know, all the time. You know, well, am I an IBMer now? I said, look, you're never going to be an IBMer. You didn't start out here. But I send him a note every April 1st because that's his anniversary date, and I know exactly how many anniversaries he's had since he's joined IBM. I'm not sure anybody else does. But you know, he feels proud about that. But it was, he wasn't there. He wasn't in what you're talking about. That wasn't important to him, right? It was like maybe the 20th thing on a list of 10 top things. Point well made. When Sam took over, there was a little bit of that retrenching. Let's find new values for the company. You know, let's have values. We had a value jam. I mean, you know, he organized it, and I executed it. So we got the values we wanted. You know, every client success, you know, trust and personal responsibility and everything, and innovation that matters for the company and the world. 3 powerful values. They were built off of the old 3 values that Watson started, but kind of updated. You know, Lou didn't want to do that. He was more focused on separating himself from old IBM, just to be candid with you. And, you know, he was looking for a new footing. And, you know, he found it eventually. To his credit, he left, you know, when he knew his job was over. He could have stayed, but he got out of the way and he picked Sam, you know, to be his successor. So you have to give Gerster a lot of credit for saving the company. Don't give him any more credit than that, though.
I mean, you and I
Who's
discussed,
running that tape? Well, we're cutting that out, right?
you and I have discussed this a couple times over the last couple of years. It truly, you know, the changes that happened with Lou, the changes that happened with Sam, the changes that haven't happened over the last decade or so, he kept on referring back to me as we were having the conversation. David, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And sometimes it changes for the better, sometimes it doesn't, but
Yeah, I mean, so...
IBM has been a history
Yeah,
of
it's
change.
you gotta go with the flow here, and I don't think we can ever get it back to what it was. I believe me, I understand exactly what you're saying. My mother gave me those lectures every day.
I know I saw a hand up.
Wait, in the back, there's a couple of them.
Yeah. So those 2 back there, and then we'll take one more question from over here. So, Brenda, you can pick which one. Who you go first? Now she's got inside information here. This could get really interesting.
I don't know if I really need this.
My former executive assistant, by the way.
I worked with Nick for several years, and one of the things he always had was a reverse mentor when he talked about mentors and learning things from the mentor.
Yes.
But he taught them, of course, but he learned things. And then I have one question for you.
Sure.
If there was one thing you were going to do differently than what you did in your career, what would it be?
Yeah, it's hard. So, great, Mary Alice. Yeah, the reverse mentoring idea that Mary Alice is talking about is something you should all give some thought to. So you let someone who is new mentor you to kind of give you the view from where they are. I did that for several years with people in Watson Research, you know, to make sure that I understood. Was it easy? Was it hard? What's the problem? You know, what are you really faced with? We think we know, but unless you're hearing it from someone else, you don't know. So having a reverse mentorship is not a very popular idea, but it's actually a pretty darn good idea if you think about it. And that's something that maybe you want to embed in what your life work is. So Mary Alice knows way too much about me. And, you know,
She was a great protector, right?
I know.
There was a day in March or April of 2008 when I came down to Nick's office, had a meeting with him. He was in jeans and a t-shirt. And I walked out to Mary Alice and said, he's leaving, isn't he? She just, I don't know. And to this day, I don't know if she knew or not, but I was informed 2 days later by Nick that he was graduating, but I knew that day, and Mary Alice was the first person I talked to right after coming out of your office.
So Mary Alice, if I had to do it all over again, you know, and I say a little bit of this in the book, The hardest decisions you have to make are not the decisions that we're talking about. They're personal decisions. They're family decisions. Are they with you? Do they understand? Do they really want to move? We moved 6 times for IBM, for goodness sake. In one period, in 2 years, we moved 3 times. The kids had no clue who they were. They had no clue who they were. They never learned their phone number. They never learned their address. It was like, why bother? I mean, we're going to move anyway. Cried every time we put them in new schools. I mean, take them to school, watch them cry. Anita had to start over again with new relationships with everyone. Would I do that again is the question. And by the way, I actually didn't do it every time IBM, Anita thinks I did. But I turned IBM down several times. You know, and I'll pay the consequences. But there were some things where I knew I had to go. I knew I had to do it. And would I do it again? Because I thought I was asking them all the right questions. I thought I was making them part of the decision. The truth of the matter is, Mary Alice, I wasn't. They were doing it for me, and I was stupid enough to believe that I had included them thoughtfully in the decision. So it's after the fact that you find out, I didn't really want to do that. I didn't want to leave Burlington. You know, I didn't want to leave Manassas. You know, I mean, and you're thinking, well, ask them, you know, voted on it, you know, but the truth of the matter is, they voted and they didn't have a vote. I would do that. I don't think that was well done on my part.
That being said, I've met your children, I've met your granddaughters, I know Anita, and they're all incredibly proud, both of what you've accomplished, but also what your success has enabled in the way that can help the community. The things Anita does, both on a local level and a national level, are remarkable. We should have a, she would never do it, but we should have an evening with Anita to really get the...
I wanted her to write a book, because she doesn't want to write it, so maybe I'll write it for her.
So we'll do 2 more questions. We have one more there.
Hi, can you hear me? I know you graduated from IBM in 2008, but I think we'd agree that IBM did not really gain a leadership position, something like commercialization of the internet, and which led to cloud, etc. Is there anything you could have done back then that could have changed where we are now in terms of IBM? I mean, a lot of people don't even know what IBM is when you ask them now, unfortunately. What could we have done then, or a little bit earlier perhaps, to change where we are now when it comes to...
It's an excellent question. An excellent question. I've actually had Lou Gerstner ask me the same question. And it's not an easy answer, and it's not a thoughtful answer. Or it's a thoughtful answer, it's not a kind answer. What IBM lacks is not the ability to do anything, to do everything. People are smart, they're incredible, they're bright. What they lacked was the courage of their convictions to do what was right. It's no more complicated than that. End of story. There is no reason why IBM shouldn't have led, the cloud. There's no reason why IBM shouldn't have led everything. IBM understands everything. They know everything. They've either thought of everything or considered it, invented it, or created it, for goodness sakes. Everything that matters. Everything that matters. The reason it falters, and it's got a history of faltering. So it's not just now. I mean, you have to remember, IBM invented the risk-based architecture. Did nothing with it for almost 12 years. Gave it to Sun, licensed it to people who were creaming us with it. IBM invented the relational database. Did you know that? They invented it. The database that Oracle thinks they invented, IBM invented. IBM, not Oracle. They didn't deploy it because they also had just invented the hierarchical database. And they had too many databases. So they chose the hierarchical database and unfortunately licensed the relational database. So we got a history of these kinds of decisions where we did it wrong. You would think that we collectively remember these things and say, okay, aren't we learning? So, when people say, why didn't they do it, or why didn't they see it, or why didn't they understand it, I scoff at that and say, no, don't blame the IBMers, don't blame the people. They understand all this stuff. It's a leader. No, I'm not blaming the accountants. I'm not going to blame the accountants. I'm going to blame leadership. It's got to be the courage of your conviction. Me. I blame me. The courage of my conviction. I blame anybody who has a position like mine. It's the courage of your conviction. Do you know what's right? The book suggests, find the horizon. Find the difference. Move to it. Commit yourself to it. And bring everybody along with you. Have the courage of your convictions. It's no more complicated than that. I mean, I know a lot of these other clowns. I know Ellison. Honestly, I know these other people. They're not any better. They're not any better. But they had to, and Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, they had the courage of their convictions. That's what makes a leader. That's what makes a difference. That's what Watson, God rest his soul, both senior and junior did. That they had the courage of their conviction. It was a pretty crappy hand Watson, senior was given. Right? I mean, he was actually tried and convicted, of a crime at NCR that all got expunged later. He was dealt a very lousy hand, but he made it work. He put it together and he built an incredible asset. And his son did the same thing. So it can be done, my friends. Courage of your conviction. In the end, the answer is the leader. It's not the people. There's nothing wrong with the people at IBM. Never was, never will be.
So I know I said we'd take one more question, but I think I'm going to wrap it on that because I think that's a good way to wrap things up. Now, we could go on for hours, and I'm sure people wouldn't mind that, but we also need to get some books signed tonight.
I'm going to say one other thing.
Oh.
I'm sorry. One other thing. We're wrapping on IBM here. I want you to also reflect on AMD, American Micro Devices. I was on their board when we rebuilt that company. Hired and fired 2 CEOs. Courage of your conviction. Leader, Lisa Su. Incredible story. How can a company of 10,000 people beat Intel when it's Intel's architecture and it's Intel's technology? How do they beat them? How do they beat them? They re-engineer it. They understand it better. With 10,000 people. How do you take on Intel? How do you take on NVIDIA? It's leadership. The courage of your conviction. We did the same thing at Delphi Electronics, which became Active. That company was perennially in bankruptcy inside GM. We spun it out in 2008 when GM went bankrupt. And in 2 years, we buffed it up, cleaned it up, straightened it up, IPO'd that company at $20 a share. Flying through the ceiling. It's one of the biggest leaders in electrification, safe, green, and connected automobiles. Same people. We didn't go out and hire a whole new crowd. We didn't fire everybody. Same thing at AMD. We didn't go out and fire everybody. How do you do that? Think about it. You have the same talent. And all of a sudden, a different leader makes a difference. My role there, I'm on the board. I was on the board of both of them. From that seat, from a board seat, just simply saying, this makes no sense to me. I'm not staying here unless we change this, this, and this. And we did. And by golly, we were right. Again, leadership matters. Don't ever forget that. Now I'm done.
Okay.